Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the Airborne and Special Operations Museum Foundation virtual book discussion. It is noon here on the East Coast of the U.S., and we are very excited to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Josh Groen of the Netherlands, and he is the author of the three of the last World War II Screaming Eagles. Today's presentation will be moderated by Jimmy Hallis, curator at the Airborne and Special Operations Museum. Thank you all for joining.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the U.S. Army Airborne and Special Operations Museum Distinguished Speaker Series. We're glad you all could attend. Today we welcome Lieutenant Colonel Josh Groen of the Royal Netherlands Army. His latest publication is the Three of the Last World War II Screaming Eagles, which presents the life stories and the wartime experiences of 301st Airborne Division World War II veterans. We'll be talking about Jim Pee Wee Martin, Dick Klein, and Dan McBride. My name is Jimmy Hallis, as Renee said. I'm curator here at the U.S. Army Airborne and Special Operations Museum. We'll be moderating today's discussion. We also have with us Abby Cashel, who works for the museum's nonprofit foundation. She's going to be assisting with questions from our social media site. So feel free to type in your questions in the chat box, and Abby can present those to everyone, and we'll get those answered. So with that said, welcome, sir. It's a pleasure to have you here and discuss your book today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and it's a big pleasure to join you all from the other side of the pond. And I have a friend in Chile who's also listening in, Philippe. So excellent. We are all around the world, I think.
Well, we welcome everybody. So I thought we'd start the first part of the discussion with you, sir, and tell us kind of what inspired you to write this wonderful history of American veterans, and maybe what you learned while you discovered while you were writing. And once we get done with that, then we'll jump into some audience questions. So,
good.
Sir, the floor is yours.
Well, you know, before we maybe start talking about the book itself, I wanted to say something else also, because, well, as you know, nothing in life happens without any effort. So, and what might do the trick is when you got a wand like Harry Potter has, well, I haven't got one like he has. So the words in this book did not get in the right sequence as a result of any magical trick. And it was hard labor, and it wasn't possible without support of several people who I'd like to mention. And first of all, of course, the three veterans, the three World War II veterans who are in the book, and Jim, Dick, and Dan. And they allowed me to interview them and to write their stories and to publish it in the book, which I'm very grateful of. And it was, I can say, an experience of a lifetime, and an honor to do so. So I want to thank all three of these men. And secondly, I want to thank the ladies I have here at home, my wife and my two daughters, who allow me always to research and to write these stories, because it takes a lot of time, and it's not time to spend with the family. So I'm always grateful that they allow me to do this. Thirdly, I've been helped a lot by several people like Mark Bendo and Ian Gardner. I must have sent them hundreds of emails, and they were always very swiftly with answers and explaining things and adding things that I was looking for. So that was always wonderful. And Mark also read the first version of my manuscript totally and gave me also lots of good advice. And besides that, he also gave me a lot of pictures, as you can see in the book. So that was also wonderful. Then fourthly, there were several people who helped me with the grammar. I'm a non-native speaker, so writing in another language, it's not very easy. So I had Dan Cruz and Kevin Price from the US, who read also a lot and also helped me take out some of the grammar mistakes, which was also a big help. And fifthly, and the last two guys I'd like to mention is Carl Malantes, a Vietnam veteran from the US, and Carlo Deste was also a Vietnam veteran. He just recently passed away, unfortunately. And they also were a big source of inspiration and support during the writing of the book. So, if you read my foreword, I could go on for a while because I've been helped, like I said, by a lot of people. But I think I've mentioned the most important ones at the moment. So, but how as you wanted to know, maybe how did the book start? Well, that's almost 5 years ago now. There was a visit into the Netherlands from World War II veterans from England, Canada, and the US. And in that group were 3 paratroopers of the 101st. It was Jim, Dick, and Guy Whiddon. So, you know, I was with them for a couple of days, talked a lot with the veterans and also with these 3 men and their stories about World War II and what they've been through. They were amazing. And well, you know, I've grown up in the Netherlands, and we know World War II from, you know, close by. And when I was born in 1963, it was, you know, like 18 years since World War II had ended. So it was still very fresh and close when I was young. So, you know, it was an issue, and it was talked about also at school a lot. So of course, I knew a lot about World War II, and having this possibility to meet several of these veterans and talk with them inspired me so much that, you know, I wanted to write a book. It's not my first book. I've published 3 books before. One was about my father's time in the Netherlands Indies. It was a former colony of the Netherlands, and my father was there as a conscript for a year in 49 until 1950, I should say. And that was my first book. And then I wrote 2 books about Afghanistan. I've served myself for a half year in Afghanistan in 2010, but I interviewed 23 young officers, which was published in a book in Dutch, and then we translated it in English. So that was my 3rd publication, and this book is my 4th. So I met Jim and Dick, as well as Guy Whiddon, and from that moment, from 2016, the project, you know, just started. And also with the support of the Army, I was also able to do this because also my commanders allowed me to work on the book and work on this project. So they've been also helping me immensely.
To have support of the boss, that's for sure. Anything else you wanted to talk about, sir?
Not the way it started. And the start was with the visit and getting to know Jim, Dick, and Guy Whiddon, and of course also the other veterans, but especially talking to these 3 paratroopers inspired me a lot. You know, I was also in the Air Mobile for a couple of years here in the Netherlands, so I also know a little bit of, you know, these kind of operations and how difficult they are. So it's you know, it's also something that you recognize. So which also, you know, comes close to your own. I shouldn't say, you know, like wartime experience, because I was never like an air mobile officer in war, but and in a war like they have served in. But I know the operations, the type of operations. So you get a picture of what they must have been, you know, what they've gone through.
Right. Okay. So Abby, do we have any questions from our audience?
No, no questions so far. If you have a question, just use the chat feature, and I will ask Jimmy, or we can proceed from there. But none so far.
Well, I think I'll start it off then. So talking about Pee Wee Martin, what was one of the things Mr. Martin talked about that surprised you the most, sir?
Oh, well, Well, Jim is someone who, of course, also saw a lot of combat during the period of World War II, and there were many amazing stories. And one of the things, of course, these guys jumped in the middle of the night in Normandy, and their life is, so to say, was really hanging on small threads with their parachutes already. And some of the men were even, killed before they ever touched the ground in France, like Jim's battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Wolverton. He never touched French soil alive. So, it was, of course, a very hazardous situation. Being a paratrooper, jumping in the middle of the night. In the Netherlands, they had a daytime jump, which was quite different, of course, again, but so to say, very dangerous, of course, also. And the thing that struck me in Jim's story also was that a couple of times he just missed being killed in action, and sometimes at the cost of others who were killed in action. And there was one story during his time in the Netherlands that was for me was very interesting, but also something to say that this happened. Let me just read, and I think the audience will understand. So Jim is telling this about his time in the Netherlands, and he says, and he told me, and I wrote it down like this: my company was put in an ore yard, and I had to dig a foxhole with one of our replacements named Joseph Egan. As the soil was sandy, it was relatively easy to dig a foxhole. We just got finished when Sergeant Saxvik came over and told us we had to move. Boy, did I start swearing at him. Saxvik remained quite calm and explained to us that Lieutenant Doughty had ordered us to move because he needed Harold Drucker and Charles Rogers close to his foxhole, for they had all the communication systems that the lieutenant wanted to have close at hand to him. Joseph and I left our initial foxhole and went to the back of the orchard and dug us a new hole. We were just about finished when an intense shelling, which lasted approximately 20 minutes, started to fall in our positions. When the attack was over, Saxvik came over to our hole and said, "I hope you sons of a bitches are satisfied." I asked him why, and he told us that the barrage killed Drucker and Rogers. He asked, "Do you want to come over and have a look at them?" I told him I would take his word for it. The only way Rogers could be identified was by his mustache and not through his dog tags, Saxvik told us. Like a lot of other men, he did not wear his dog tags because they rattled. I took a bicycle inner tube in England and put a piece of that tube around each of my dog tags to prevent them making any noise. So that was how close it was. He already had finished the foxhole, and he had to dig a second one. And well, this happened with the guys that took his initial foxhole. So, and that was really one of the stories that really hit me, to see how close it sometimes also can be in a war, and how Jim escaped those situations.
Wonderful. Jimmy, we do have some questions. Do you want me to proceed with the first one?
Sure, yeah, rattle it off.
Joe asks, how was the cooperation and excitement from American soldiers and their families?
Great question.
Yeah. Nobody ever said no. Jim, I have to say that Jim and that's one of the things that we've talked about Jimmy before the interview, is that they are all so very humble about what they did, and they don't like to put on the, I think you say, the pedal stone in English. They prefer to not to be in the spotlights. And so Jim initially was a little bit he was, we had the discussion about it, should it be in a book or not. And initially I thought to write a book alone about Jim, and that was really too much for him. So that is how I developed the idea also to make a book about 3 paratroopers, so that the book didn't only focus on Jim, but also on other paratroopers, which helped him also to join up and to allow me to use his story in the book. So that was the only thing, because Jim, he's also a very humble guy, and having his own book was a little bit too much. So after I changed it into a book about 3 paratroopers, it wasn't a problem anymore. So, but the families were fine with it. I had all the support. I'm still in touch with the children of the veterans themselves. So no troubles at all.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And that's kind of par for the course. If anyone's ever read Dan Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, these men were very, very humble. Felt like it was their duty, and a lot of them are hesitant to talk about their experiences, and it's just great that you were able to capture that. So, Abby, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we have a few more. So Anne asks, were most of the men volunteers or draftees?
To be in the paratroops, you had to volunteer. So of course they were all drafted, because I think all soldiers, but I'm not sure, I'm not totally aware of the system, but during my research I see that most of them have a draft card. So most of them probably were also drafted in World War II. But to be a paratrooper, you had to volunteer. So all of the men who were in a 101, and I probably also in the 82nd, all had to volunteer for paratrooper duty in World War II. So yeah, they did it willingly, and then did it very well. That's not to say very willing. He was afraid of heights. So in the beginning he had when he saw a movie about the paratroopers, and his girlfriend said, "Oh, these men must be so brave." He thought to himself, "Well, these guys must have been really stupid to jump out of an airplane." But well, he later did it himself, more than once. So, and to overcome his heights, his afraid, and I say afraidness, or being afraid of heights. So yeah. Volunteers.
Make somebody jump out of an airplane. On the flip side of that, to being a glider rider, if you didn't want to be a paratrooper, then as we hear in the States, at least in the US, in the Army, and probably over there, you're voluntold, so you don't have a choice.
Yep.
Ride the glider into combat, which was equally dangerous. But
oh yes. Yeah, that's something that I may also want to add, because that's something that Jim also said. Because if you look at like on television with the Band of Brothers, and Jim also said, it's always the paratroopers, who are talked about a lot, and paratroopers, oh, so dangerous. But there was also a regiment, a glider regiment, the 327th, and these guys fought as hard as the paratroopers during World War I, and they also, had a very difficult time in their battles. So many people, if you talk about the 101, they think only about paratroopers, or maybe the 82nd, the same thing. But they also had glider regiments, and that was an even, maybe a hazardous job as well as being a paratrooper. So, I just want to mention that also, because Jim also mentioned it to me, that most of the time people forget all these other guys who also fought in the division, and they equally shared as much burden as the paratroopers.
Very true, sir. Very true. Well, let's keep going. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Yes, we actually have about 4 more.
Okay.
Barbara says, Guy is a friend of mine, and I would love to hear some amazing stories that he may have shared with you. He is an amazing man. Thank you so much for documenting this important history. So I guess the question would be, do you have any interesting stories that you can think of on the spot?
Oh, about Guy Whiddon is a very interesting story that I think it's in the Netherlands. That Guy was walking in an area, and I think he was also alone, and then he suddenly met a German soldier, and they started to fight with each other, a close combat battle, hands on hands, everything. And So the guy is during the fight, he gets on top of Guy, and you know, he has a pistol and is ready to, you know, shoot Guy through his head, I think. And then they were looking in each other's eyes, and the guy, you know, stopped, and not Guy Whiddon, but the German soldier stopped and surrendered himself to Guy, and Guy walked away with him unharmed and handed the guy over, the German soldier, as a prisoner of war. So Guy was almost killed in action by this German soldier, but by something he never, you know, he thought maybe he was a little bit older, that, and Guy was of course a young paratrooper, that the German soldier thought it you know, it maybe in a resemblance of his son or something, and that, you know, he didn't kill Guy, but, you know, he surrendered himself and, you know, was a prisoner of war. So that was a very remarkable story about a guy's experience. And Guy also was in a situation with Jim that he was also close to being killed, and there was a mortar barrage, and he was standing together with 3 of his friends. So all 3 were killed by that mortar, and Guy survived. You know, he was badly hurt and was returned to the US to heal, but yeah, he was also very close to being killed in action, like Jim had several times. So yeah, that's some of the stories of Guy.
It's amazing.
We do have another comment from Joe. He said, "Tell us about the heartwarming stories we hear about our American soldiers returning back to Holland decades later as older men and receiving warm welcomes into little towns and being made to feel like heroes. We love those stories. Do you have any of those stories to tell?"
Oh, well, something that also, that was why Dick Klein was also so willing to help me, because that was one of the things he said, you know, of all the times he traveled to Europe, he said, I always felt like royalty when I was visiting the Netherlands, because, you know, everybody is always so kind and thoughtful, and, you know, gave us so much back, you know, like a free stay in a hotel, free dinners, free trips. So, you know, that was a way to show our appreciation to the veterans. And Dan is always telling me the same thing also, you know, that he always feels like sometimes, so like being home when he's in the Netherlands, and that people are always so warm to him. He says, you know, from all the countries that he's been, you know, like France and Belgium and the Netherlands, he says the Netherlands is my favorite country. So, but to have stories, you know, I know that, you know, what we do is we drive them around, and they can meet like children also, so that they can also tell children on school about their experience, which is always, you know, what the children like, and to hear the personal stories, and I don't know if it's a good example, but one thing that we always try to do, at least in the trips that I know of, is to give them time to go to a cemetery, you know, because like Dick Klein, Jake Winkard, his best friend, was killed in the Netherlands, and making it possible for them to return to the cemetery and to show their respect to their former comrades is also one thing that they always very grateful that they have the opportunity to go over there. So that's one thing that, you know, I think is very important, and it's something that they always, you know, appreciate, that we also try to make time for these kind of things in the trips. So I hope I answered the question in a good way.
Yes, sir. And something maybe some of the audience might not know is a lot of families adopt some of the graves and maintain them over there.
Yes,
which is their way of. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, the Margata Cemetery, I think it's quite a unique project, because I don't think many other cemeteries in the world have such a program, but all the graves and also the missing persons that are on the wall, because there's a wall of missing soldiers also. But all these men and women are adopted by Dutch families. Some of the families have more graves, and they maintain the grave, so they make sure that it's a proper site, and they always go over there, like when the soldier was born, or maybe the day when the soldier is killed, to lay flowers over there. And some of them also are in contact with the family back home in the US,
Right.
so that if the family wants something done, you know, like putting flowers over there, or if they want to have any information, there's also a lot of families have contact with like the children or the grandchildren of the soldiers. So that's a program that's been there for years, and there's a big line of people, you know, ready to adopt a grave, because, you know, sometimes, you know, somebody passes away, a Dutch person. So, but there's plenty of people on the waiting list willing to do the same and to continue this. So it's also, I think, a way to show how grateful we are for what the soldiers done for us.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I know the families are very grateful for those Dutch families that do that. So thank you.
And one of the recent projects they also try to do is to get a picture from each of these soldiers. And I think they have about over 8,000 graves, and I think by now they have something like 7,000 pictures gathered. So that's one of the thing that's called Faces of Margraten, the project, that they are trying to get one picture of each man or women that is buried over there.
I think I might have answered a few of those research questions, because I get emails from overseas quite regularly over the years, and I think I might have contributed to that. But that's just a wonderful program. We're just pleased that you guys can do that for us. Are there any other questions from our audience, Abby?
Yes, Felipe asked, it's normal that after 70 plus years after World War II, veterans forget some details or mix some facts. Did you have to deal with those issues? If so, how did you solve them? And what tricks did you use to refresh their memories?
Great question.
Yeah, that's difficult. I in the book of my father, from the war of independence with the Indonesians, there was a situation where one of their soldiers was accidentally killed by a shot from a gun, and I talked with one of the men who was close to it, and I also had reports from that incident. And the man told me that, I ran over to that room and I saw Koki standing over there. So I had to tell him that in the report from like 70 years ago, he had told the police that when he came to that room, he found the guy laying on the ground. So, so 70 years later, he says, he was standing, and 70 years before he had said, he was lying on the ground. And, so these things happen, they meet each other at reunions, they talk with each other, and their own memories are getting mixed up with the memories of other soldiers. So that's a normal situation. So sometimes they tell stories like they've done them themselves, but sometimes it is a story of somebody else. So that's always, and it's of course very difficult after all those years. And I was writing the book from the Netherlands with getting as much information as I could to confirm the stories, but it's still a difficult thing. And it's what I did do is during my interviews, I was the first thing I would do in a session was go through the questions and let them answer them one by one. And then I would go over the questions again the second time. And then they could tell it the second time. So I could also see if the answer was still the same or not, so that they would tell the story in the same way and not in a different way. But it also gave me possibility, because I knew a little more details, to go more in depth to the story itself. But by asking it twice, and I recorded it also twice, I could also see if they would tell the story differently or not. And it hardly happened like this, and like Dan McBride, he is a great storyteller. And I met his son in America during one of my visits, and he also told me, I know my father, of course, he was also, I think, in his 50s. He says, I hear his stories almost like 40 or 50 years. He says, and he hardly changes anything. So that was also a way for me to know that the stories that Dan told me and his son confirmed that they were, genuine stories. But it's always difficult. And I must say that sometimes I recognized a little thing from like Band of Brothers, which was watched a lot by the veterans. And then there was one story that one of the veterans, and I won't mention him, but one of the veterans told me a story that I thought that might have happened in Band of Brothers and not in his service during World War II. So I left that story out of the book.
Yeah, fortunately, you're right. It does happen. I've kind of used the term blended history over the years, where the veterans read the books and different accounts, and as sad as it is, time takes its toll on the memory, and they tend to blend other stories sometimes, and that's where the research and the way you approach the documenting these veterans really worked out well.
Yeah. And one thing was also fortunate, like Dick Klein, he was a history teacher all his life. So one thing that Dick told me, once he was handling the subject of World War II in his classes, he said to his children, you can put away the books because I can tell you about World War II because I was there. And so Dick has told his experience all his life during his work as a teacher. And so his stories must have been also in his, in his mind, because he has told them so many times that, they must have really stuck into his mind. So I think I was very fortunate with all three men that they had such great knowledge and still had such a vivid memory of World War II. So sometimes you also have to be a little bit lucky, I think.
Very true. And to our audience, if you have not picked up the book, highly recommend it. It's a great read. One of the neat things about the book that, as a curator and historian, that I like is Colonel Groen, the footnotes at the bottom of the pages. Well, at least in the American version. I'm not sure about the one that was released over in Europe, but it was neat to reference right to the bottom of the page and reference the footnote instead of having to flip back and forth, which sometimes can be a pain when you're really engrossed in a book like this one is. So for those of you who haven't gotten it, you'll really enjoy that. Some good information in the footnotes that kind of eggs on to the story as well. So Abby, how about any more questions?
Yes, we do. They keep coming, which is great.
Awesome.
So Jim asked, was there anything about their growing up was there anything about them growing up during the Great Depression that influenced or prepared them for what they faced in Europe?
Well, yes, indeed. And I think, if I may add, so I'm always more interested in and that's what I also write in the foreword, in those personal stories. And I try to be, write about these men as personal as possible, because there are many books about generals and units, and I also like to read those books, but to be able to talk and write about the soldiers that really did the job, with their feet on the ground in the mud, that was my my goal, to give them the floor this time and not those generals, so that was something that I really like to do, and I hope I succeeded in that. And yes, I also wrote about their youth, and because I was really interested in that, because of course this is the generation that also grew up during the Depression years, and that must have also help them in a certain way, maybe to survive the war. Well, one thing that they told me from that period, but I think in the US it's really odd for us here, but in the US you can have weapons at home, which is quite forbidden here in the Netherlands unless you have a license, which is not something that you are giving, as in the US, not in the same way. It's much harder. So, but they also told me that in every room or like in the living rooms, there would always be a gun around, and they would use it a lot for hunting, because in the Depression years, they lacked food, and one of the things that added up for having something to eat was the hunting that they did, and all of them, learned to hunt when young. Dick, for instance, tells about the times that he went on hunting together with his father, and what they shot and what they ate. So yeah, all three were already able and to handle guns when they entered the paratroopers. So yeah, that helped them immensely. And Dick also said so, that he was such a good shot because all the practice that he already had before the war. So yeah, that was something from the Depression years. Getting food on the table by hunting was something that helped them to handle guns during the war.
Yeah, I would think for those men, it would make them very appreciative of the things that they did get when they could get food, especially even in combat. You referenced that a little bit, I think, through all three veterans in the book. So next question, Abby.
Okay. Charlie asked, what kind of training did they have before they jumped into battle? Are there still reenactments on the anniversary of D-Day?
So there are two questions.
Yes.
The second one is yes. I do see a lot of reenactors everywhere. I think around the world you see it happening. Also here on this side of the pond, there's a lot of reenactment, and there's also a lot of men who go through jump school and get a license to jump and so on. Remembrance days here. They jump in Normandy or they jump in the Netherlands from planes. So that still happens. And yes, the training, like Jim tells, I must say that all three, not all the regiments had the same training, because the 501 and the 506 trained at the COA. And the 506 was the first regiment to start at the COA. That was in the build-up phase of the COA that the 506 started over there, and they were then, when they went to jump school, the 501 started training at the COA. But the 502nd, I think, if I'm right, they were at Fort Bragg initially. So the 501 and the 506 were at the COA, but the training was, of course, very hard. Especially the difference, and as you see in Band of Brothers, was running up to COA, which was a bit more in the schedule than with the 501, because the 501 was there in the winter, and Dick said it was too cold to run like Jim sometimes did in just his swimming trunks. So the 506 really ran to COA like Jim, and you see in Band of Brothers almost daily with in several, how you say that? Yeah, we call it tenues, uniforms, like, in full gear or just in sports gear, or like Jim sometimes in his swimming trunks. So, but the training was very hard. Jim tells that they started with, I think, like 6,500 men, and in the end they were with, I think, about 1,700 left over in about maybe 5 or 6 months. So yeah, the training was the initial training before going to paratrooper school, which was also a very tough period. But also at the COA, they ran down from 6,500 to 1,700, soldiers after, and then afterwards they went to paratrooper school. But I think they didn't lose very much guys during paratroop school, which other units did have, because of also paratrooper school was very hard. But because of the hard training they had at the COA, the 506, I think they maybe lost a few guys, but not in a way that other units have lost during paratroop training. I hope that answers the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Next question is, before the book was published, did the veterans have a chance to review it? If so, what feedback did you receive from them?
Oh yes, that's something that I always do. They have to also give permission for the things I write, because I try to stick as close as possible. And sometimes, if you see the story on paper, it's maybe different than when you tell it. So sometimes but nobody really complained about. At least the veterans didn't complain about how I wrote the text, and they didn't have really major comments. Mark Bendo helped, like I said, he helped me a lot, and that was also, like what it was asked earlier, because of the memories of the veterans, is of course Mark Bendo has interviewed over 1,500 paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division. He started in the beginning of the 70s, starting interviewing these veterans, and he has over 1,500 veterans interviewed, during 40 or almost 50 years. So he has enormous knowledge of what happened with the division during World War II. So he read the manuscript, and he also gave me some, good advice about the stories. So these 4 men, have seen the initial manuscript and were given the possibilities to give me comments. I must also say that Dan McBride's son saw the manuscript, and he commented on some things that his father said, because Dan is also very outspoken in some ways, and his son saw something about his grandmother. And sometimes you have, of course, that you are not on the, how you say that, a good connection with your mother-in-law. Well, Dan was not so good connected with his mother-in-law, but still his son said, it's my grandmother, and the way my dad talked about my grandmother was not something that he wanted to see in that way in the manuscript. So after he told me that, I've changed that. And there was one situation also when one of the veterans talked about one of the non-commissioned officers who didn't perform well in his opinion, and I took away the name because he was also killed in action. And still, I agree. It's Dan's point of view. It was Dan. It was his point of view. But still, I think out of respect, I took away his name, because I don't think that it's of anybody's use to know who he was. So these things happen in a war. Sometimes it's not easy to fight in a war, and sometimes people get scared. And there's also stories like Jim told me about a lieutenant who was very scared in Normandy. He was given the name of Foxhole, the Foxhole lieutenant. And then when he was in the Netherlands, he performed very well. He did what he had to do. So these things also happen. Sometimes people are scared, and war is a scary situation. And one day you are, able to function, and the other day something happens, and you're not able to function. So in this case, I just left out the name because of my respect for every soldier who fought during the war. So that's also a way that I looked at the stories myself.
That's really interesting, and that was a great question. Thanks for whomever posted that. Appreciate that. We have time for a few more.
Sure. Rudy asked, what unit were the 3 men assigned to?
Okay. Well, my initial idea was also to have the division had 3 paratrooper regiments, the 501, the 502, and the 506. And my idea was to have a paratrooper of each regiment. So so Dick and Jim. Dick was from the 501 and Jim was from the 506. So I had to find a third guy from the 502. Guy Whidden was, like I said, I met him. He was from the 502. But I wanted also a paratrooper who had jumped into Normandy, jumped into the Netherlands, and who also fought at Bastogne. And Guy, unfortunately, was severely wounded in the Netherlands and then returned to the US. So I had to find somebody else from the 502. And through Mark Bendo got me in touch with Dan McBride. And but that was quite a story and a quest, because finding a paratrooper of the 502 in his 90s who had been to these three parts of World War II and still being able to tell, a good story. It took me some time, and Mark Bendo, after I got in touch with Mark Bendo, after a couple of months of research, he immediately told me, Dan McBride, you have to talk with Dan because they know each other also for a long time. And well, if you read the book, I think that was a very good advice because Dan has some tremendous stories. So did that answer the question good enough?
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, and say hindsight's 2020, but just like you mentioned, sir, that to jump into Normandy, survive combat, jump into the Netherlands and Market Garden, survive that. Captain Bastogne fought through that, especially in one of the coldest, wettest winters in European history. At that point, it's phenomenal what those three veterans were able to accomplish and come home at the end. It's amazing. It's really easy, I think, to read the book or read books about these veterans and not truly think about what it is they really experienced. And when you pick up Colonel Groen's book, you'll understand what that combat was to these men. So yeah, tough thing to do.
It is.
Abby, do you have any more?
No, no more questions on my end.
No?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I have one for you, sir, on Dan McBride. I'd have to say that section of the book was probably the most enjoyable for me. I really enjoyed reading Mitch McBride's recollection and his history. His details of places and events were incredible. Was there anything about his use of the English language that caused you problems?
Well, it's
maybe things that English, American colloquialisms, sayings that might have thrown you off.
Oh yes. If you mean that, yes. There were many issues sometimes that he had a typical saying that I did not grasp what he meant to say. It also happened to me when I met him in Normandy, I think in 2017, and others also noticed it, that then when Dan mentioned something, I didn't really knew what he wanted to say with that saying, but and they saw my puzzled face. So everybody around him that understood Dan really had a big laugh because they saw me that I didn't know what Dan wanted to tell me. But yeah, Dan has, if you read the book, he has all kinds of way to to add to a story a certain saying, which was really a big humor. And if talking about, because what I like in Dan, like you say, but all three stories are very interesting for me. And like I said, it was a privilege to interview them and talk about them. But there was one, like I said, Dan always was so humorous also in his stories, because he remembers also very funny things. And there was one story, I'm picking up the book, that happened in England, and I will quote from the book. We had a little Greek guy in the platoon named Angelo Demopoulos. Demopoulos and Sergeant Lee hated each other, but Lee was in a position to do something about it. He was always giving Demopoulos a bedtime. One morning in England, he ordered Demopoulos on latrine duty. Demopoulos started bitching about it, after which Sergeant Lee said, "Greek, I bet you wish I were dead so you could piss on my grave, don't you?" Demopoulos was never short of a witty remark and replied, "No, Sergeant, I don't wish to stand in a line for anything." So, and then said that was one of the best comebacks I ever heard somebody say. So, and that's then, you know, he has so many humorous stories, but also very emotional stories. And that was also, I think, very interesting in his story, that he was also able to open up and show also the situation that he was in a very difficult time. And you know, that mix of stories is very interesting also. But you know, all three, like I said, are, you know, I'm happy to being able to tell their stories and to write the stories and to have published the book. So, yep.
That was excellent. I did enjoy that story. So,
Yeah. Yes.
standing in line.
I can see it. I can see it happen.
Yeah, especially in a little English pub, you know, very tight quarters, small places. Yeah.
Well,
So no other questions out there, Abby? No, from our audience?
We had one come in. Jim asked, "Is there a plan to make a documentary about your book?"
Oh, excellent,
yeah.
excellent, sir.
Yeah, actually, I was very fortunate in this case, because there was one thing that I had in mind, because the most difficult thing. Let me first say, all the revenues of the book, all the proceeds of the book, are going to 2 U.S. foundations who give scholarships to children of veterans. So the Patriot Foundation and the Screaming Eagle Foundation. Then, if you choose to publish a book through a regular publisher, the proceeds, you know, they will be for the writer will be very, you know, maybe you get like 10% or less, most of the times less than that. So it would mean that the revenues for the foundations were very low. So I decided to self-publish the book. Well, the problem then is, of course, that you are also responsible for everything surrounding the book. So also the publicity, and that has been a tough nut. I was, you know, this is the third interview in a year that I'm giving. So and I've tried hard to get in touch with newspapers, with radio stations, also veteran radio stations, but the response was like 99.9% of no response. So it's very, very difficult to, you know, get attention if you self-publish a book. There was even a newspaper saying, you know, we don't write reviews of self-published books. You know, if that is a way to say that self-published books are not interesting, or, you know, just bullshit, but it happens. But the good news is that a friend of mine, Rick, and I don't know if I pronounce his last name well, but it's Oncale, Oncale, is a friend of mine, and he connected me with Tracy Hunter of she has an organization called Beyond the Call, and she makes documentaries of World War II veterans. And Tracy has managed to interview all 3 men this year, despite the COVID. We had a plan to, Dan was interviewed in January, and we had planned to interview Dick and Jim in March, but because of the start of COVID, it wasn't possible to interview them in March. But she recently also interviewed Dick and Jim. And so she's working on finishing the documentary, and we are hoping, and we can still need some money for the editing process. So if you go to her Facebook page, Beyond the Call, you can always donate some money. But she's hoping to finish it this May. And she has won an Emmy for one of her other documentaries, The Last Signal. And she has good contacts with PBS. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that PBS is also willing to have the documentary in maybe some states or nationwide. And, you know, every publicity is good because every sold book, all the revenues go directly to the foundations in the US. So every sold book on the internet, that is money for children of veterans for their scholarship. So, you know, spread the word and tell others about the book and where the proceeds go. That will maybe help the foundations.
That's
So
wonderful.
yes, there is a documentary on its way.
Well, we will definitely here at the museum push that, and hopefully down the road, when the documentary is completed, maybe we could bring it in. We have a nice sized theater that we could show it and promote it, and um, maybe even do some book sales for you. And hopefully after COVID is winding down, we can get the public in here, and maybe we can try to do something like that. I think that'd be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I talked with the director because there's some opportunities later this year at the museum about Normandy, for instance, and D-Day. So there might be some possibilities to also connect Tracy with the museum and to have the documentary used during the exhibit about Normandy. So yeah, if we can work that out, that would help also probably.
That'd be great. I think that's something we should work toward. So if we don't have any more questions, I think we're almost out of time. I'd like to thank Crone for taking his time out of his evening, as he's about 6 hours behind or ahead of us actually, participating today. It's been a pleasure talking to you about your book. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And getting further insight into the research and the writing.
I was happy to do so. The hour flies by, and I was glad that people joined in, and I hopefully, like I said, was able to answer their questions in a good way.
Oh, I think you did, sir. I'd like to thank all who attended out there in the virtual world. Your questions and your comments are greatly appreciated and spot on. Thank you very much. We hope you all are able to visit the museum soon. Again, don't forget, pick up your copy of the book. It's well worth your time. On behalf of the ASOM and the foundation staff, we thank all our veterans for their service and hope you all have a wonderful new year. Stay safe. Good night.
May I add one little thing?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I've noticed that some of the people had a problem getting the book through Amazon in the past year.
Okay.
There's sometimes a little and I've tried to get this done, fix this, but Amazon says it's the publisher, and the publisher says to me it's Amazon. So I'm not sure why it happens. But if people want to have the book, Barnes and Nobles, I've told several people who had problems with Amazon, and they went over to Barnes and Nobles without any problems. So if Amazon can't get you the book, please go over to Barnes and Nobles, because I have good reviews from people about buying a book at Barnes and Nobles.
Okay, there you go. You got a Barnes and Nobles near you, swing by and grab a book. I think our gift shop has a few copies. Check our website, and if so, you can order online. You don't have to come into the museum. If you don't happen to be nearby, they'll ship anywhere in the world. So check the museum's website, asomf.org.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, and then everybody who's on there, enjoy your day.
Thank you. You too. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.